My name is Aisha Rahman. I was 23 when this story truly began. People often thought my life was simple, maybe even easy. I came from a middle-class family. Not rich, not poor, just comfortable enough that I never had to worry about my next meal. My parents loved me, but they were strict, always reminding me that my life should follow a certain path. Study well, get a respectable job, marry a man who could provide stability. On the surface, I seemed like the kind of girl who followed rules. I studied hard, I smiled politely, I never argued too much. But inside, I was searching for something more. Something real, something raw, something that would shake me and make me feel alive. I wasn't looking for perfection. I wasn't looking for a prince in shining armor. I was looking for truth. For depth. For a love that went beyond appearances. And then I met Armin. He wasn't anything like the men my family imagined for me. He was quiet, stubborn, rough around the edges. His life was nothing like mine. Harder, heavier, marked by struggles I had never known. And yet, from the moment I saw him, something inside me whispered that he was the one who would change everything. I didn't know then that loving him would mean breaking myself open, crying silent tears at night, holding on even when it hurt. I didn't know then that my heart would learn both its greatest pain and its greatest joy through him. But I knew one thing the moment our eyes met in that quiet library. This man would become my story. I still remember the first time I saw him. It wasn't anything extraordinary. Not the kind of magical encounter you would expect in love stories. He wasn't standing in the rain holding an umbrella, nor was he looking like a hero in a movie. He was just there, a little lost, a little broken, yet strangely magnetic. His name was Armin. I met him during my final year at university. I had been sitting alone in the library, my notebook scattered, my coffee slowly turning cold as I struggled with the last few pages of my thesis draft. I was tired, drained, and secretly frustrated with myself for not being the kind of girl who had her life neatly sorted out. And then he walked in. Armin didn't belong in the library, at least not that day. He looked out of place, his restless eyes scanning the shelves as though he wasn't sure what he was searching for. His clothes were simple, worn at the edges, his posture slightly slouched, yet there was something about him, something that made me look twice. When his eyes accidentally met mine, I expected him to look away. Most strangers did. But he didn't. He gave me a half-smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, but was polite enough to acknowledge my existence. And then, instead of walking past, he sat down at the table right across from mine. "Do you mind?" he asked. I shook my head quickly, trying not to seem flustered. He pulled out a battered notebook, flipped it open, and began scribbling furiously, as though the world would end if he stopped writing. I tried to focus on my work, but my attention kept drifting back to him. His hands were rough, his penmanship uneven, but there was a fire in his expression, a fire I had never seen in anyone before. It was strange. He didn't speak much. In fact, that day he barely said another word. But something about his silence pulled me in. Weeks passed before we truly talked. He wasn't the type to make conversation. If anything, he seemed guarded, as though he had built walls so high no one could ever climb over them. But slowly, little by little, I found pieces of him slipping through those walls. I learned that he came from a background very different from mine. His childhood had been filled with hardships, responsibilities far heavier than his young shoulders could carry. He worked part-time jobs, barely managing his tuition, and often skipped meals just to save money. Yet, despite everything, he carried a quiet determination, a will to rise above the circumstances that tried to drown him. At first, I didn't understand why I cared so much. Maybe it was because he was different from the boys I had known before, those who cared more about parties and appearances than about life's real struggles. Armin was raw, honest, and polished. And though he didn't talk much every time he did, I listened like his words were rare jewels. One evening while walking out of campus together, I asked him, "Why do you always look like you're fighting a battle no one else can see?" He stopped walking, his hands buried deep in his pockets. His eyes softened, but his voice was low. "Because I am," he said simply. That was the moment I knew. There was more to him than the world gave him credit for. More than even he gave himself credit for. And somewhere inside me, a thought began to bloom. Maybe I could be the one who helps him fight that battle. Maybe I could be the one who sees the man he doesn't yet see in himself. I didn't know then how complicated that path would be. I didn't know how many times he would push me away. How many nights I would cry myself to sleep wondering if I was foolish for loving someone who didn't even know how to love himself. But I also didn't know how deeply he would carve his name into my soul. And one day, years later, I would look back at that moment, that quiet library, that half smile, and realize it was the beginning of everything. The beginning of how he became the man I wanted. Loving Armin was like holding fire in my hands. It warmed me, lit up my world, but sometimes it burned so painfully I wondered if I could endure it. He was not an easy man to love. He had his walls, his silences, his stubborn pride. While I grew up in a family that, though strict, had given me stability, Armin had never known what it meant to be taken care of. He had learned to rely on no one but himself. To him, accepting help felt like weakness. And so, even when I wanted to be there for him, he would often pull away. "Why do you always push me back?" I once asked him, my voice trembling with frustration after he refused to let me pay for our dinner. We were sitting at a tiny roadside tea stall, the kind he loved because it felt real, unpretentious. The evening air was cool, the city buzzing around us, but in that moment, all I could hear was the ache in my own voice. He looked at me, his eyes shadowed, his jaw tight. "Because I don't want you to see me like this." "Like what?" I whispered. "Like someone who doesn't have enough. Someone who can't give you what you deserve." I reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. That was how he was. Constantly fighting invisible wars inside himself. Constantly convinced he wasn't enough. And yet, no matter how much he tried to hide, I could see the goodness in him. The way he offered his seat on crowded buses to strangers. The way he worked double shifts without complaint, just so he could keep his promise to send money back home. The way he treated the world with a quiet dignity, even when life had shown him no kindness. Armin didn't understand that to me. He already was more than enough. There were nights when we sat on the rooftop of his rented apartment, staring at the stars, the whole city glittering beneath us. He would tell me little pieces of his life, fragments he had never told anyone else. How his father had left when he was just a child. How his mother had broken her back working in a factory just to keep food on the table. How he had promised himself that one day, he would become someone she could be proud of. "You will," I told him one of those nights, resting my head on his shoulder. He chuckled bitterly. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," I said softly. "You're already on your way, Armin. You just don't see it yet." He was quiet for a long time, then finally whispered, "You see too much in me." Maybe he was right. Maybe I saw too much. Maybe I loved not just the man he was, but the man I believed he could be. And maybe that was dangerous because it meant I was falling in love with a version of him that even he didn't believe in. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles. It was in his silences, his insecurities, his refusal to let me in fully. But I held on. I held on because I saw glimpses of the man he was becoming, even if he didn't. Like the time he surprised me on my birthday with a second-hand book I had once mentioned wanting months ago. He had saved for weeks to buy it. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed, but to me it was the most beautiful gift in the world. Or the time he walked across the city in the rain just to bring me soup when I was sick. His clothes soaked through, his hands trembling from the cold. He would never admit it, but love lived in his actions. Not in words, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet sacrifices he made when no one was watching. Still, there were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was chasing a dream. He didn't say, "I love you," easily. He didn't reassure me the way I longed for. And sometimes, I feared that one day his walls would finally push me away for good. But every time I thought of leaving, every time I tried to convince myself that maybe I deserved someone easier, someone softer, I remembered his eyes. Those tired, restless eyes that carried too many stories, too much pain, too much hope. And I couldn't let go. Because I didn't just love Armin for who he was. I loved him for who he was becoming. And I promised myself silently that no matter how hard it was, I would stay until the day he finally saw what I already saw. That he was worth loving. That he was already the man I wanted. Every love story has breaking points. Moments when everything seems fragile, when one wrong word or one wrong choice could end it all. For Armin and me, those moments came more often than I wished. The first big fight we had still lingers in my memory. It wasn't about anything extraordinary. In fact, it started with something so ordinary, so small, that anyone else would have brushed it aside. But with us, small cracks often revealed much larger wounds. It was a Saturday evening. I had just come back from a family dinner where, as usual, my relatives asked endless questions about my future. "So, when are you going to settle down? What about that boy you're always with?" My mother's worried glances and my uncle's subtle disapproval all lingered in my chest like stones by the time I met Armin later that night. We were sitting in his apartment, the hum of the old ceiling fan filling the silence. I was restless, anxious, and I blurted out something I shouldn't have. "Do you ever think about our future, Armin? About what happens after this?" He looked up from his notebook, his pen frozen mid-sentence. His face tightened, and I knew instantly I had touched a nerve. "Our future," he repeated, his tone low. "What kind of future can I give you?" The sharpness in his voice startled me. "Why do you always say things like that?" I asked, trying to hold back the tears burning in my eyes. "Why do you always talk like you're not enough?" "Because I'm not," he snapped louder this time. "Look at you, look at your life, your family, your comfort. And look at me. I'm barely surviving, barely holding myself together. You deserve someone who can give you the world, not someone who's struggling just to keep breathing." I stared at him, stunned by the force of his words. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was pain. Raw, unfiltered pain. "You think I care about money? About status?" I whispered. "All I want is you." He shook his head, running a hand through his messy hair. "You say that now. But one day, when you realize how much you've sacrificed for me, you'll hate me for it. And I can't bear that thought." That night, I left his apartment in tears. I walked home alone under the dim streetlights, my heart pounding with confusion and fear. For the first time, I wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe love wasn't enough. Days passed without us speaking. He didn't call. He didn't text. And though my pride told me to stay silent too, my heart ached with every hour that went by. Finally, on the fourth day, my phone buzzed with a message. "Can we meet?" I wanted to ignore it, to punish him for the way he had hurt me, but I couldn't. That's the thing about love. It makes you weak and strong at the same time. When we met, his eyes were tired, his shoulders heavy with guilt. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he placed a small paper bag on the table between us. Inside was my favorite pastry from a bakery across town. It was such a simple gesture, yet my throat tightened as tears filled my eyes. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low. "I shouldn't have said those things. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning. And when you talk about the future, it scares me. Because I want it so badly, but I don't know if I can give it to you." I reached across the table and took his hand. This time he didn't pull away. "We'll build it together," I whispered. He nodded, though I could see the uncertainty still lingering in his eyes. But at least he let me in again. After that fight, something shifted between us. We became more careful, more aware of each other's wounds. He still struggled with his insecurities, but slowly, he began to trust me with them. He started talking more. Not much, but enough to let me glimpse the storm inside him. One evening, while walking by the river, he said quietly, "Do you know what I used to dream of when I was a boy?" "What?" I asked. "A house," he said. "Not a big one. Just small, with a door that doesn't creak, a roof that doesn't leak, and windows where sunlight comes in. A place where I don't have to wonder if tomorrow we'll still have somewhere to live." My heart clenched. "You'll have that one day," I told him, squeezing his arm. "And when you do, it'll be filled with love. I promise." For the first time, he smiled without bitterness. It was small, fleeting, but it was real. Still, love wasn't suddenly easy. There were more breaking points, more moments when his silence cut me deeper than words ever could. There were nights when I questioned myself, when I asked if loving him meant slowly losing parts of myself. But every time I looked at him, I knew the answer. I couldn't walk away. Because love, true love, isn't about perfection. It's about staying even when it hurts. It's about seeing the man behind the walls, the boy with the broken dreams, and choosing him again and again. And so I stayed. Even when it hurt, I stayed. Because I believed, with every piece of my soul, that one day he would see himself the way I saw him. That one day, he would become the man I always knew he could be. The months that followed were not easy. Loving Armin always felt like walking on a rope stretched thin, every step careful, every word fragile. But beneath the uncertainty, something new began to bloom. Armin was changing. Started with small things. He began to let me help him in ways he would never have allowed before. If I cooked for him, he didn't argue. If I paid for tea, he no longer snatched the bill away angrily. Sometimes he even surprised me by showing up with little things. A chocolate bar, a flower he picked from the roadside, a handwritten note with just 3 words. "Thinking of you." Those gestures might have seemed small to others, but to me they were everything. Because they weren't just signs of love, they were signs of trust. One afternoon, I visited him after one of his long shifts. His apartment smelled of dust and exhaustion. He was sitting by the window, his notebook open, his pen motionless. "You're not writing?" I asked, placing 2 cups of tea on the table. He shook his head. "Sometimes the words don't come. Sometimes silence speaks louder," I replied. He looked at me for a long moment, then said something he had never told me before. "You make me want to be better." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I smiled, my chest aching with warmth. "You already are," I whispered. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "Not yet. But I will be. For you. For us." It wasn't just words. Slowly I began to see the proof. Armin started working harder, not just for survival but with purpose. He applied for a better job, one that terrified him because it meant interviews, competition, rejection. For days he prepared, pacing around his apartment, rehearsing answers, asking me to listen and critique him. The night before his interview, he was nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned his only clean shirt. I held his face in my palms and said, "You've already won, Armin. Just by trying." The next day, when he walked out of that office with the faintest smile, I knew something had shifted inside him. He had gotten the job. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't high-paying. But it was steady, respectable, and it meant he could finally stand a little taller. "I did it," he whispered that evening, almost in disbelief. His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw tears glistening in his eyes. I hugged him tightly. "You see, you're becoming the man I always knew you were. But growth is never without pain." With his new job came longer hours, more responsibilities, less time for us. Sometimes I felt the distance growing again, not from insecurity this time, but from exhaustion. There were days when I barely saw him. Nights when he came home too tired to talk, collapsing into bed without even eating. I tried to be patient, to remind myself that this was the price of progress. But loneliness has a way of creeping in, even in love. One night I confronted him. "Armin, I don't want to lose us in all this," I said, my voice breaking. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "I'm doing this for us." "I know," I whispered. "But I don't just want your success, Armin. I want you." That was the night he made me a promise. He pulled me into his arms and said, "No matter how hard I work, no matter how tired I am, I'll never let you feel alone in this. You're the reason I'm fighting. Don't ever forget that." True to his word, he began to balance better. On Sundays he would take me on long walks, holding my hand, listening to my endless stories. Sometimes we sat by the river, sometimes at the little tea stalls he loved, sometimes on the rooftop where our dreams first spilled into the night sky. He still didn't say, "I love you" often, but I felt it in everything he did. In the way he shielded me from rain with his jacket. In the way he quietly saved money for our future. In the way his eyes softened every time he looked at me, as if I was the only person who made this hard world bearable. And slowly I realized something. Armin was no longer just the boy fighting unseen battles. He was becoming the man who faced them with courage. The man who dreamed not only for himself but for us. The man who, brick by brick, was building the life he had once thought impossible. One evening, as we walked through a busy market, I caught him looking at a jewelry shop. His eyes lingered on the rings displayed in the glass case. For a moment, his hand tightened around mine. I smiled knowingly. He quickly looked away, embarrassed, but I saw it. The future he once feared was no longer something he avoided. It was something he was beginning to imagine, with me. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the chaos of the market, I realized something even more powerful. He wasn't just becoming the man I wanted. He was becoming the man he wanted to be. Life has a way of testing love, even when you think you've found solid ground. For us, the test came in the form of distance. Not emotional but physical. 6 months into his new job, Armin was offered a transfer. It was a better position, a step forward, but it meant moving to another city. When he first told me, my heart sank. We were sitting in our usual tea stall, the city lights glowing faintly behind us. His hands were wrapped tightly around his cup, his shoulders tense. "I don't want to go," he said quietly. "But if I stay, I'll be stuck. This could be my chance to finally stand on my own 2 feet. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to smile. "Then you should go." He looked at me, his eyes filled with conflict. "And what about us? We'll survive," I whispered, though inside I wasn't so sure. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Distance has a cruel way of magnifying insecurities, of making every silence feel heavier, every unanswered call sharper. There were nights when I missed him so much it hurt physically. I longed for the comfort of his quiet presence, the warmth of his hand around mine, the way he made even the darkest days bearable. But despite the ache, I held on. Because I knew this was not just about us. It was about him becoming the man he was meant to be. He called me every night, even if only for a few minutes. Sometimes he was too tired to say much, but the sound of his voice was enough. Sometimes he read me pieces of his notebook, lines he had scribbled in between work, words that revealed the heart he still struggled to show. One night, his voice cracked over the phone. "I don't know how to do this without you." "You don't have to," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm with you. Always." After nearly a year of long distance, he came back. I will never forget the moment I saw him at the station. He had changed. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes brighter, his presence stronger. He looked like a man who had fought battles and won. When he spotted me in the crowd, he froze for a moment, and then he smiled. A smile so full, so unguarded, that I felt my knees weaken. He dropped his bag and ran toward me, pulling me into his arms. "I missed you," he whispered into my hair, his voice breaking. "I missed you more," I sobbed, clinging to him as if I'd never let go again. That night, back on the rooftop where so many of our memories lived, he pulled something from his pocket. Small velvet box. My breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple ring. "It's not much," he said quickly, his voice trembling. "But it's everything I have. And one day I'll give you more. One day, I'll build you the house I always dreamed of. One day, I'll give you a life you'll never regret choosing. But for now, will you stay with me? Will you be mine?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," I finally whispered, my voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands shaking. Then he cupped my face and kissed me with a tenderness that felt like a promise that no matter how hard life became, we would face it together. Marriage didn't happen overnight. We waited, saved, built slowly. But through every step, Armin was different now. He no longer pushed me away. He no longer let his insecurities drown him. He worked hard, yes, but he also made sure I never felt alone again. He showed up for me in the small ways, in the big ways, in every way that mattered. He became not just my love, but my partner, my safe place, my home. One evening years later, I found him standing at the doorway of our first little house. It was small, just like the one he had dreamed of. The paint was chipped in places, the windows were a little crooked, but it was ours. I wrapped my arms around him from behind and whispered, "Do you see? You did it. You built your dream." He turned to me, his eyes soft. "No," he said quietly. "We did it. You believed when I didn't. You stayed when I gave you every reason to leave. You saw the man I could be, and because of you, I became him." My throat tightened as I kissed him, tears streaming down my face. And in that moment I knew. This was what it meant to love and to be loved. Not perfection, not fairy tales, but two broken souls choosing each other again and again, until together they became whole. Epilogue. Years later, when people looked at us and said, "You two are perfect together," I smiled quietly. They didn't know the storms we had weathered, the tears we had shed, the nights we had doubted everything. But I knew. I knew that love is not about finding a perfect man. It's about standing beside the imperfect one, holding his hand through the darkness, until he learns to see the light in himself. And Armin, he became that light. He became my home. He became the man I wanted.